Hi there, I'm going to finish on Quality by Robert and Pirsig today. And the last section is called Attitude, and it's section 5. And that gives the impression, and I think is going to play out, that if we've got a theory, if we've got a metaphysics based on quality, how do we actually implement it in the world? And that's what this chapter is going to attempt to convey to us. And actually, I think that in comparison to a lot of his other work, this chapter really does convey it to us in a very simple way. Part of the reason is there's some excerpts from later letters after Lila, that give us, direct from Pirsig what kind of encapsulating in a way that really we're going to relate to in this little corner, if those of you in this little corner looking at this, that are really going to tie this together, and that has been sort of the way I've tried to tie my project together. So I really love this chapter. I mean, I love this whole book. But all right, so it starts with a poem, and I'll read that. May all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another, or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is to be said to be the sublime abiding. Okay, so the word abiding, of course, is like stance or attitude, and stance is a word that I'm going to be using a lot more since Chino. All right, so let me read this last part. Free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. So what does that mean? Oh, this is from the Karaniya Metta Sutta, the Buddha's words on loving kindness, translated from the Pali by Amaravati Sangha in 2004. So free from drowsiness is kind of like paying attention. It's focusing your attention on presumably quality. This poem is a lot like what Jesus says, love thy neighbor. It's a very similar kind of thing. There's some distinctions between the Buddhist stance and the Christian stance. And I've talked a little bit about that, and I'm not going to go into that much right now. I want to come back to this poem in another section. The different distinction between, the Eastern and the Christian or Western Judeo-Christian stances, you could make videos and videos and videos about it, or you could try to simplify it, which I'm kind of trying to do, and I hope to get to that a little bit more later, maybe even in my next video. All right, so I am going to come back to this poem with another section that's coming up here. All right, so the first section is a very famous, very iconic section from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, an Inquiry into Values, 1974. As we ride through the coastal manzanita and waxen leaf shrubs. That's funny. I was just in California, and the plants are so different from the East Coast. Waxen leaf shrubs. Everything sort of either looks like a palm tree or a succulent. It's very, very different. Chris's expression comes to mind. I knew it, he said. The cycle swings into each curve effortlessly, banking so that our weight is always down through the machine, no matter what its angle is with the ground. The way is full of flowers and surprise views, tight turns one after another, so that the whole world rolls and pirouettes and rises and falls away. So that's a description of a very... Now this is the end, and Pirsig and Robert and Phaedrus have been reunited. They are now one person again, and this is why this is so important. But this is a new stance. Chris and his father are reunited, and it's like very fresh and very dynamic, and this explains how dynamic it feels, the two of them riding on the road. This is dynamic quality described with this, the whole world rolls and pirouettes and rises and falls away. I knew it, he said. He comes back now as one of those, it comes back now as one of those little facts tugging at the end of the line, saying it's not as small as I think it is. That's from earlier in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where he is describing how a quality idea or fact or whatever comes to the surface. Like you kind of get a sense that it's there, but you're not sure. And then it, is this sense that you have of quality, is it going to rise and become something tangible, or is it just going to dissipate and because it wasn't as high quality as you thought? And the metaphor he uses is fishing. Little fish tugging on the line. Are you going to catch? Is this one going to bite, or is it going to release itself and go away? It's been on his mind for a long time, years. All the problems he's given become more understandable, right? I knew it, he said. He must have heard something long ago, and in his childish misunderstanding gotten it all mixed up. That's what Phaedrus always said. I always said, years ago. And this is, of course, the first time he says that, Phaedrus always said, I always said, years ago. And Chris must have believed it and kept it hidden inside ever since. We're related to each other in ways we never fully understand, maybe hardly understand at all. He was always the real reason for coming out of the hospital. To have let him grow up alone would have been really wrong. In the dream, too, he was always the one. He was the one who was always trying to open the door. So a lot of people comment on how Robert raises Chris and how he's too strict and he's not touchy-feely enough. But I think that is the point for Robert. Robert doesn't have that capacity, that he's too scared to go in that direction of being, he's not that he's unkind to Chris, but we would like them to have more of a connection, and they're always at odds in this book until this very end part. And because Chris wants Phaedrus to come back, the Phaedrus part of his father, and that's missing. And the Robert part is very guarded, very Robert's MO is to maintain decorum so he doesn't, from shell shock of being in the psychiatric ward. I mean, it's very important to him to just keep his nose clean and be very conventional and act like, just a regular guy. And that means that whole dynamic side of him is missing. But it also is why he keeps guard on Chris, is because that's Robert's point of view is don't stray from the norm. I haven't been carrying him at all. He's been carrying me. I knew it, he said. He keeps tugging on the line, saying my big problem might not be as big as I think it is. Isn't that beautiful? Because the answer is right in front of me. For God's sake, relieve him of his burden. Be one person again. Rich air and strange perfumes from the flowers of the trees and shrubs enshroud us. That's also very California. There's a lot of fragrance in the foliage there. Inland now, the chill is gone and the heat is up upon us again. Again, very California. If you're near the sea, remember what Mark Twain said, is that he never spent a colder winter than summer in San Francisco. Well, that fog and that dampness and that coldness comes off the sea, in the morning, and then it burns away. but they're inland, so they're away from that too. Inland now, the chill is gone and the heat is upon us again. It soaks through my jacket and clothes and dries out the dampness inside. The gloves, which have been dark wet, have started to turn light again. It seems like I've been bone-chilled by that ocean damp for so long I've forgotten what heat is like. I begin to feel drowsy, and in a small ravine ahead, I see a turnoff and a picnic table. When I get to it, I cut the engine and stop. I'm sleepy, I tell Chris. I'm going to take a nap. Me too, he says. We sleep, and when we wake up, we feel very rested. More rested than for a long time. Again, because all that burdensomeness of having to relate to half of himself, the pure, the left brain side, the undynamic side, the Robert side, is, when he's reunited, the harmony is back, and it is a place of rest. The home, a spiritual home is a place of rest, as we learned in China. I take Chris's jacket and mine and tuck them under the elastic cables holding down the pack on the cycle. It's so hot I feel like leaving this helmet off. I remember that in this state, they're not required. I fastened it around one of the cables. Put mine there too, Chris says. You need it for safety. You're not wearing yours. All right, I agree and stow his too. Do you think Robert would ever do that? The road continues to twist and wind through the trees. It upswings around hairpins and glides into new scenes, one after another, around and through brush and then out into open spaces where we can see canyons stretch away below. Beautiful, I hollered at Chris. You don't need to shout, he says. Oh, I say and laugh. When the helmets are off, you can talk in a conversational voice after all these days. So that's certainly a metaphorical sentence. When the helmets are off, when this plexiglass that was between them because Friedrich wasn't available to Chris, they would have to somehow try to communicate with each other. It'd be difficult. It'd be like shouting through helmets on a motorcycle. So beautiful, beautiful metaphor. Well, it's beautiful anyway, I say. More trees and shrubs and groves. It's getting warmer. Chris hangs on my shoulders now, and I turn a little to see that he stands up on the foot pegs. That's a little dangerous, I say. No, it isn't, I can tell. He probably can. Be careful anyway, I say. After a while, we cut sharp into a hairpin under some overhanging trees. He says, oh, and then later, ah, and then wow. Some of these branches over the road are hanging so low they're going to conk him on the head if he isn't careful. What's the matter, I ask. It's so different. Okay, so first of all, he is careful. He has an attitude of care, and he also has an attitude of what is and is not dangerous. He's a sensitive kid. What's the matter, I ask. It's so different. What? Everything. I could never see over your shoulders before. Need I point out that metaphor? The sunlight makes strange and beautiful designs through the tree branches on the road. It flits light and dark into my eyes. Dynamic again. We swing into a curve and then up into the open sunlight. Another metaphor. It's true, I never realized it. All this time he's been staring into my back. Another metaphor. What do you see, I ask. It's all different. We head into the grove again, and he says, don't you get scared? No, you get used to it. After a while, he says, can I have a motorcycle when I get old enough? If you take care of it. What do you have to do? Lots of things. You've been watching me. Will you show me all of them? Sure. Is it hard? Not if you have the right attitudes. It's having the right attitudes that's hard. You need a stance where you're connected to quality, not to the gumption traps, not to anxiety, not, especially with anxiety, boredom, all the attitudes that keep you from maintaining your motorcycle. You need to be connected to quality. Oh, after a while, he is sitting down again, and he says, Dad, what? Will I have the right attitudes? I think so, I say. I don't think that will be any problem at all. So again, Chris's sensitivity and his ability to have the right attitude, and to want what's best, and to want that harmony and that connection. That's why it's not going to be any problem at all. And the whole problem, this so-called mental illness that he's been diagnosed with, is a very sensitive kid whose father has been taken away from him, but whose body is still walking around. So can you imagine? And I would say they're back on the quality track. So I said at the beginning of this section that there are a couple letters, excerpts, 2 or 3 of them in fact, that really kind of put it in the best language that I've seen, what the quality aspect of the metaphysics of quality is all about. In a subject-object, this is letter, May 8th, 1993, 2 years after Lila was published. In a subject-object explanation of things, quality is objective and love is subjective. What you love, you say, has quality. What you say has quality, you love. In the metaphysics of quality, the two are not separate compartments. They are the same thing. You can call the metaphysics of quality the metaphysics of love, and it will be exactly the same. And since quality and God and love are considered to be the source of all things, there is no problem with E.M. Forrester. But you are likely to have difficulties with scientists when you tell them that hydrogen and oxygen combine with each other because they are in love. If you say they value the combination, it is much easier. So the metaphysics of love, quality, love, and God are the same thing, are considered to be the source of all things. This is the one of Plotinus. This is the Brahma and Brahman. This is the implication that seeps through all religious and spiritual practices, and in some modalities it's obscured, in some it's not. Now, if you listen to Jonathan Pageau's notion of God, it's similar to this. If you listen to the Vedantic notion of God, it's similar to this. The more spiritual, the more metaphysical, the undivided one that divides into heaven and earth. You know, God, there is darkness, and then heaven and earth arise out of this. This is the same kind of thing. But what's important here is in practical understanding. What you care about, what you love, has quality. If something feels like it has quality to you, you care about it. This is relevance realization. He's going to talk about this more, but this is the essence that we should take away from the metaphysics of quality. That the metaphysics of quality is the metaphysics of love, and that opens up a whole way of integrating Pirsig and his philosophy into the problem of our age, which is bringing, however you want to say it, bringing God back into it, bringing science and religion together. Now, the E.M. Forrester reference, I think, from what I can tell, as E.M. Forrester wrote a essay called "What I Believe," and what he believes is a humanistic understanding, meaning secular humanism, I guess you could say. So what Pirsig is saying here is that you don't have to, you don't have to believe in a personal, you don't have to believe in a tangible entity as a God to unite with the modalities that believe that God is a tangible entity or a personal God. And so someone like, say, so this is where the John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pageau and Paul Vanderklay could come together. in terms of this little corner. So we're going to go into that more. All right, the next reading is from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. This is a very good section, which, obviously everything plays on this notion of the metaphysics of love. There has been a haze, a backup problem in this Chautauqua so far. I talked about caring the first day, and then I realized I couldn't say anything meaningful about caring until its inverse side, quality, is understood. I think it's important now to tie care to quality by pointing out that care and quality are internal and external aspects of the same thing. A person who sees quality and feels it as he works is a person who cares. A person who cares about what he sees and does is a person who is bound to have some characteristics of quality. And by bound to have some characteristics of quality, that could mean that your approach to life is one of orientation towards quality, which is a stance to take in life. And if your orientation is towards quality, then that means that some of the bad things that have happened, some of the things that we know are bad and we do it anyway, like, profit for profit's sake, for one, is not a stance that we should be taking in the future. Thus, if the problem of technological hopelessness is caused by the absence of care, both by technologists and anti-technologists, okay, this is a very big deal for what's going on now. Does this not describe what we're dealing with right now when we think about AI, when we think about social media, and now AI? That has the potential to be many times more destructive than social media. Don't we feel that technological hopelessness? And that's because we feel like AI isn't being created with care. It's being created with efficiency in mind, profit in mind, like objective reasoning, what seems reasonable, even though it's not any good, reasonable in the sense that how can this make my life easier? And a lot of reasonableness is just that. How do I make my life easier? Leaving out meaning, leaving out connection, leaving out all these other values for the sake of getting from point A to point B as fast as possible, as cheaply as possible, and in a way that would make me the most money. And that is the essence, a lot of technology right now, and that is not a quality position, because we're leaving out that whole other side of what it takes to live a quality existence. Thus, if the problem is caused by the absence of care, both by technologists and anti-technologists, and if care and quality are external and internal aspects of the same thing, then it follows logically that what really causes technological hopelessness is the absence of the perception of quality in technology by both technologists and anti-technologists. Federer's mad pursuit of the rational, analytic, and therefore technological meaning of the word quality was really a pursuit of the answer to the whole problem of technological hopelessness. So it seems to me anyway. So Federer was pursuing pure classical reason and came to find, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, but came to find that that type of reason left out half the story. So I backed up and shifted to the classic romantic split that I think underlies the whole humanist technological problem. But that too required a backup to the meaning of quality. And this, of course, is the journey, the philosophical journey that Federer takes in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. But to understand the meaning of quality in classic terms required a backup into metaphysics and its relationship to everyday life. And to do that required still another backup into the huge area that relates both metaphysics and everyday life, namely formal reason. That's when he goes back to Plato. That's when he goes back to the separation of quality, the diminution of the good underneath truth, and truth being, logical, formal, demonstrable, testable truth. So I proceeded with formal reason up into metaphysics. and then into quality, and then from quality back down into metaphysics and science. So he reverses the order. He puts quality at the top of the hierarchy, arete, and then develops his metaphysics from arete, from quality down. Now we go still further down from science into technology. Now, how are you going to apply that to technology? This is the huge question of our time. And I do believe, at last, we are where I wanted to be in the first place. That means that he's developed the stance, the one that we need to adopt going forward if we want to have human flourishing and meaning and spiritual connection and connection to others at the top of our hierarchy, and excellence and beauty and all the good things, the good, versus what is reasonable, what is efficient, what is profitable. So this is sort of an outline of his stance. But now we have with us some concepts that greatly alter the whole understanding of things. Quality is the Buddha. Quality is scientific reality. What does he mean by scientific reality? That means that, I think it means that the whole point of science is human flourishing. It's not to be co-opted. It has to come from a point of value. It has to be a tool of value versus a thing in itself. And where we are is the thing in itself, which doesn't necessarily have to be high quality. It just needs to be reasonable. It just needs to be testable. It just needs to be something you can prove in a material way, in a materialistic way. Quality is the goal of art. It remains to work these concepts into a practical, down-to-earth context. And it is for this there is nothing more practical or down-to-earth than what I have been talking about all along, the repair of an old motorcycle. So the stance for Pirsig is to care about, is to determine what you care about, and care about it in a way that you're caring about it as you go. You know, you're working on that motorcycle. You're making quality decisions every step of the way. That's what we need to be doing in the now. So this whole concept that underlies every spiritual practice, the more mystical ones obviously, it's more obvious in the mystical ones, is being in the moment with quality. So coming back to the moment and evaluating, is what I'm doing good? Is what I'm seeing good? And then the whole question of good. Now, you can think that high quality is low quality if you are caught in the gumption traps. Or if you, and in Lila, you know, he has sort of a method of looking at what is quality if you're a little unsure, which is, are you putting your biological needs ahead of your spiritual needs, for example? And sometimes you do need to do that. It's going to depend on the context. But are you doing it when you could be putting your spiritual needs first? Are you putting biological needs before your social needs? Are you putting your social needs before better ideas that can help society? You know, the hierarchy of values. And are you keeping out dynamic quality that's going to change your values, that's going to change the way you see things, because you want to preserve this, because you have an egoic interest, invested egoic interest in this value, that you are too married to it. Okay, so this I just love, because I noticed this, and this has really added a whole dimension, especially in the context of this corner. Letter, March 6, 1993. When an object has quality, you love it. When it doesn't, you don't. There are different kinds of love. Biological, eros, right? Social, philia. Intellectual, philosophia. And dynamic, which is agape. So this is something that it can unite quality in a way that we can understand in this little corner, that Christians can understand, that religious people in general can understand, that scientists can understand, hopefully someday, that technologists can hopefully understand someday, is that agape, dynamic quality, is the totality of the stance we need to be taking. and everything defers to that. If we have to go down into the intellectual, if we have to go into the social, if the biological takes precedence, then that's fine. But all our values are ensconced in dynamic quality, agape. So what do we mean by agape? I think what I mean is, or at least the way I understand it, is that this is a love that emulates the instinctual care a mother has for their offspring, and a care understanding that is deeply embedded. Remember, Panksepp had as one of his 7 emotions care, which is strictly the mother and the offspring. And it is unconditional. It is the most important love. It is the love that is complete and total and is enjoined with the offspring. Like some of the early, or some of the psychodynamic and attachment theorists said, I can't remember, I think it was Winnicott who said, a child and the infant and his mother are one entity. It's that kind of enjoyment of love and quality. That's agape. And also, there is no ego in agape. And I think that's an important distinction between the other kinds of love. Because in biological, in eros, there's not ego per se, but there is the body, which is a level below the ego, the id. Not that eros is all id-oriented, but, just for the sake of what we're talking about, the sake of trying to make this a little bit of a streamlined argument. The philia is ego because it is the personage, the self in the world in relation to other people, and that's where the ego actually has a function. And philosophia, you could say that in intellectual pursuits, the ego can be dispensed with. So, but the ego does figure in deciding that one intellectual idea is better than another. There's a certain amount of ego because it's like the intellectual ideas are for the betterment of society. But in dynamic love, in dynamic quality, in agape, the ego does not exist. That's why that flow state, that enjoyment that Pirsig talks about is beautifully described by agape, in my opinion. Another thing I wanted to say, earlier I said Brahma and Brahman. I meant to say Brahma and Atman. So, sorry about that. Okay, so the next section is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. The difference between a good mechanic and a bad one, like the difference between a good mathematician and a bad one, this is referring to the section on Poincaré, is precisely this ability to select the good facts from the bad ones on the basis of quality. He has to care. This is an ability about which formal traditional scientific method has nothing to say. So that is, I'm going to stop here a minute. That's formal traditional scientific method assumes that it is the vehicle to absolute truth. When to see science in that regard doesn't, science as an entity, let's just say, as a power or principality, doesn't realize that it is ensconced in value, that the only reason that science exists is because it's valuable to humanity. And it is operating ostensibly for the betterment of humanity, the betterment of mankind. And it gets sidetracked, in which it is for the edification of itself. It's long past time to take a closer look at this qualitative preselection of facts, which has seemed so scrupulously ignored by those who make so much of these facts before they are observed, after they are observed. Again, the observed facts prove whatever hypothesis, and that proof in itself becomes enough, not whether these facts have value or not. The fact that they line up with the hypothesis is what's valuable. I think that it will be found that a formal acknowledgement of the role of quality in scientific process doesn't destroy the empirical vision at all. It expands it, strengthens it, and brings it far closer to actual scientific practice. Actual scientific practice, again, meaning for the betterment, to make things better. That is scientific practice. And so by worrying that value or quality or love is going to destroy the objectivity of science, that's a fruitless worry. You simply are using science as a tool for the betterment. And I think what happens is because, we were just talking about ego. The cultural immune system and ego are very similar in terms of the way they function. And so the ego of the entity of of science, the power of science, principality, that kind of emergent property that science becomes, is more concerned with conserving its provable, the fact that it winnows down material reality into something that's absolutely demonstrable, means that it becomes worried that value itself, because value updates and value changes and value is dynamic, that this might destroy science, when in fact it actually, as he says, expands it and strengthens it. It makes it a more solid entity because it becomes dynamic, because it updates, because it carries on with what's true, what is better. And the really good scientists say an experiment that doesn't work is actually more valuable than one that does. And that's not the case in modern science, because so many of these papers they can't reproduce these papers. They're so concerned with making these scientific experiments in these papers result in something unequivocal, that they're willing to fake it to some degree just to make it look good. And that's the corruption of science. Okay, the next one is letter, November 20th, 1992. And this is another one of these great letters about love and quality. The term love sometimes refers to a biological emotion, but at other times it refers to a dissolution of the separation between subject and object. In the second instance, love seems identical to the perception of quality. All right. The next reading is from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance again. Zen Buddhists talk about just sitting, a meditative practice in which the idea of a duality of self and object does not dominate one's consciousness. What I'm talking about here in motorcycle maintenance is just fixing, in which the idea of duality of self and object does not dominate one's consciousness. Again, we're talking about the removal of ego, which is what preserves self. Self in this definition. There's a lot of definitions of self, but in this particular definition, we're talking about myself. So the entity that you are and the object, when the ego is suspended in this flow state, if you want to call it that, there is a non-dual relationship between the two. So relationship. When one isn't dominated by feelings of separateness from what he's working on, then one can be said to care about what he's doing. That is what caring actually is, a feeling of identification with what one's doing. Again, flow state, suspension of ego, becoming completely involved and enraptured to the point where time doesn't exist anymore. That's what caring is. True caring is timeless. It's suspended in the now, which is again why being in the present is such a central tenet of most spiritual practice, especially the mystical aspect of spiritual practice. Zen has something to say about boredom. Oh, I want to say something else about this first. So what is good, Friedrich? Need anyone tell us what good is? So if you care, that what you care about is good. Again, you could say, well, if you care about something bad, then it's not good. But remember, you have, what he's talking about is pure caring, without the gumption traps, without the barriers to the true connection between self and object. And if you care about the wrong thing, if you really listen to yourself, there's going to be one of those barriers in there. There's going to be a certain self-deception, John Vervaeke would say. Zen has something to say about boredom. Its main practice of just sitting has got to be the world's most boring activity, unless that Hindu practice of being buried alive. Unless it's that Hindu practice of being buried alive. You don't do anything much. Not move, not think, not care. What could be more boring? I don't think being buried alive would be boring. I think it'd be quite the opposite. Yet in the center of all this boredom is the very thing Zen Buddhism seeks to teach. What is it? What is at the very center of boredom that you're not seeing? Being in the moment is the most generative space. All right, interview, 1994, University of Oslo. Now this probably, out of all these letters that describes the love quality conjugate, this is my favorite. The essence of the metaphysics of quality. The term love is primarily a subjective term, something that exists inside ourselves, of ourselves. Quality, on the other hand, has primarily been used in connection with objects that are outside of ourselves. An object has quality, but we have love. The metaphysics of quality transcends the subject-object dualism. Whatever we love has quality. Whatever has quality, we love. They always go together. If you should seriously use the term love in science, you would say that hydrogen and oxygen combine because they love each other. The metaphysics of quality is really a metaphysics of love. All right. Next reading is from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I care about these moldy old riding gloves. I smile at them flying through the breeze beside me because they have been there for so many years and are so old and so tired and so rotten. There is something kind of humorous about them. They have become filled with oil and sweat and dirt and spattered bugs. And now when I set them down on the table, even when they are not cold, they won't stay flat. They've got a memory of their own. They cost only $3 and have been restitched so many times it is getting impossible to repair them. Yet I take a lot of time and pains to do it anyway because I can't imagine any new pair taking their place. That is impractical, but practicality isn't the whole thing with gloves or anything else. If you are worried about artificial intelligence, there is something in us that will reject something trying to control our lives. We have an intentionality. There's also something in us that's going to reject the authoritarian and tyrannical efficiency of classical reason. And there is something in us that's going to reject, again, a technology that tries to inordinately control our lives. Now, you say we're lost to social media. Roughly. But there's also people who reject it, and there are ways of dealing with social media that if we want to do it, we can. We haven't gotten to the point where we want to do it enough. But, you read things like that book by Cal Newport, I forget what it's called. It's about deep work, where you just do not look at that crap. for some time and do the deep work and learn how to do it in a disciplined manner. We have the capacity, as the marvelous human beings we are, to actually reject momentarily or even for long periods of time this technology. We have the choice. We do have the choice. The fact that it's brainwashing us and reducing our capacity for making that choice and making it harder and harder doesn't mean that that choice is gone. And if we get to a point where it seems like our humanity is going to be stripped from us, we may very well turn around and reject it. We also may harness it for very good things. If you look at that fellow, I really should be prepared when I do this. There's a fellow who's been on Lex Friedman, and he worked for Tesla, and he's been on with Jonathan Peugeot and Jordan Peterson, and I wish I could remember his name, but just look up AI and Jordan Peterson. You're going to get this guy who was on Lex Friedman, and damn, I wish I could remember his name. Anyway, he has a kind of positive attitude because of this reason. He thinks that our actual humanity is going to make it difficult for AI to take full control. So we'll see. I mean, it's so speculative, you know. Anyway, talking about, I don't know, I don't want to go down the AI rabbit hole. But practicality isn't the whole thing with gloves or anything else. You don't have to do what is efficient or reasonable. You might want to do what's good. The machine itself receives some of the same feelings. With over 27,000 on it, 27,000 miles, it's getting to be something of a high miler, an old timer. Although there are plenty of older ones running, but over the miles, and I think most cyclists will agree with this, you pick up certain feelings about an individual machine that are unique for that one individual machine and no other. A friend who owns a cycle of the same make, model, and even the same year brought it over for repair, and when I test rode it afterwards, it was hard to believe it had come from the same factory years ago. You could see that long ago it had settled into its own kind of feel and ride and sound, completely different from mine. No worse, but different. This paragraph perfectly describes why quality does not manifest in the same way. It might have, in social patterns, it might have a certain kind of pattern that it manifests. That social morality is going to be roughly the same kind of thing for a period of time. And there may be certain factors in social morality, like, not killing people when you don't have to, that are going to be pretty hardwired. But this is a perfect description of how quality is going to manifest in different ways. There aren't certain things that are good and certain things that aren't. This might be a certain amount of differentiation between something like Christianity and the moral, the what is that thing that C.S. Lewis talks about? The moral, it's a strict set of moral tenets that are unchangeable. And the metaphysics of quality would say they're not exactly unchangeable, but they may be very long-term because we are limited as human beings. But I think the point of this is that quality isn't really going to always manifest as the same thing, although it will follow rough patterns in social quality, in all levels of quality, just because these are long-standing patterns. I suppose you could call that personality. Each machine has its own unique personality, which probably could be defined as the intuitive sum total of everything you know and feel about. All right, that would be in the great metaphor of the boxcar and the train and the track of quality, boxcars. The intuitive sum of everything you know and feel about would be the boxcars, which you're carrying around with you, what is deterministic. This personality constantly changes, usually for the worst. I don't know why he'd say that. But, I guess he's referring to motorcycles aging, but sometimes surprisingly for the better. And this And it is this personality that is the real object of motorcycle maintenance. He's talking about motorcycles. The new ones start out as good-looking strangers and, depending on how they are treated, degenerate rapidly into bad-acting grouches or even cripples, or else turn into healthy, good-natured, long-lasting friends. This one, despite the murderous treatment it got at the hands of those alleged mechanics, seems to have recovered and has been requiring fewer and fewer repairs as time goes on. Beautiful. And you could also say that you are the motorcycle. So the better treatment you get, the more you take care of yourself, the more other people take care of you, and the more you take care of other people, the fewer and fewer repairs you're going to need. Okay, another wonderful letter on love and quality. Letter, February 1st, 1994. In a subject-object metaphysics, love and quality are separate. Love is subjective, quality is objective. In the metaphysics of quality, the primacy of the subject-object metaphysical division is dissolved, so that at the highest level of understanding, love and quality are the same thing. It kills me that I was bumbling through, 3 years of trying to figure out Pirsig, and here it is. This is exactly what I was trying to figure out. Thank you, Wendy Pirsig, for this book. And these letters were available. I just haven't read everything that Pirsig did, and I probably should have, but I didn't. But I'm reading it now. So love and quality are the two conjugate sides of internal and external experience, and they are inseparable. Letter, February 9th, 1994. The metaphysics of quality can just as easily be called the metaphysics of love. If you substitute the word love whenever you see the word quality, it'll come out the same. The next reading is a letter, July 23rd, 1992. I think that love is normally considered to be subjective, and quality is considered to be objective. Any object you love has quality. The metaphysics of quality denies the dominance of this subject-object metaphysics over quality, and thus denies it over love too. Love is not subjective. This is exactly what the Christian mystics say. This is a really interesting and I think important point, that love is not subjective, because love is the nature of the universe. And it's not so much... Do you see what he's saying here? It's not so much... It's subjective in the sense that the item that you find, or the object, or the person, or the idea, or whatever that you find has quality, is going to be subjective to you, considering... your unique sum total. Let's see what he says. Each machine has its own. The next reading is a letter, which is July 23rd, 1992. I think that love is normally considered to be subjective, and quality is considered to be objective. Any object you love has quality. The metaphysics of quality denies the dominance of this subject-object metaphysics over quality, and thus denies it over love too. Love is not subjective. This is exactly what the Christian mystics say. So do you know what he's saying here? It's so interesting. By saying love is not subjective, what he's saying is that love is something that we receive. If you want to say it from the universe, from God. The Christian mystics say, God, we almost like a radio, we tune into the signal of love, the nature of the universe, the nature of God. That is how Brahma is Atman. Quality-love is both undefinable and infinitely definable. It doesn't need a definition, but it can have as many as you want. Do I even need to explain? Do I even need to comment on this? It makes so much sense. I'm not going to. It's so beautiful. All right, the last reading is a lecture, one of the few, I suppose, that he gave. Lecture 1975, Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, Minneapolis. In 1952, I'd been in India for a year and a half. I'd studied at Banaras Hindu University. It was very hot when I got there. I was extremely depressed. It took about a month to overcome the culture shock, I guess you'd call it. I knew it was going to be different, but somehow I expected something better or something more to happen when I hit it. He had a preconceived notion of what India was going to be all about. Isn't that something so common when you think a place is a certain way and you get there and it's what it is? I went to my classes there and I listened very hard, but I couldn't remember a thing they said. It was in one ear and out the other. The language of Indian philosophy is just an endless proliferation of mountains and mountains of words. They all had a meaning. They were all structured, but it wasn't something I could absorb. And so I was only there for a short time, and I was getting very listless. I started to lose weight. I was down to about 98 pounds at one time. So he goes there and he's expecting somehow to connect with what he has discovered to be a philosophy, an ancient way of seeing things that's going to make sense to him of what he's discovering, of what he read in The Meeting of East and West by Northrop on that military ship, on that military tanker. And what he does, he thinks he's going to find the territory, and what he does is he finds the map, a bunch of words with definitions, academic setting. So he goes to India, and what he finds is an academic setting. And so I was only there for a very short time, and I was getting very listless. I started to lose weight. I was down to about 98 pounds at one time. I was in danger of getting very sick, which was very dangerous to be. Not only because he was so thin, but because there are a lot of biological problems with the water in India in the 1950s. There are very serious diseases there. So I started to wander away in the city to various places and become kind of lost. I felt very guilty about this. I should be studying. I was there on the GI Bill. I was supposed to be there memorizing things, but I just kind of wandered through the city. And looking back on it now, I think I did the best thing I possibly could because I started to learn in a rather different way. Instead of trying to change things objectively, I'd given up on it. I'd walk all day in a weakened condition and sometimes sit for long periods of time and brood about things. There was a spot I used to be at day after day, just watching the river, staring, gradually performing something unconsciously that was very close to meditation. I was just stopped. I had nothing but despair all around me, so I just sat and watched. People seemed to sense that. They were very kind to me. There were very few days when someone wouldn't come up and say, "Hi, I see you're in a daze," or something. They would talk to me, invite me into their homes, and I became very enamored with these people. And I learned a lot about India that I couldn't have found out anywhere in the textbook. So, like the motorcycle journey, he learned about the quality of India from actually experiencing India and not reading a book about it. The territory, not the map. So that is the end of this wonderful book that really has so much insight into not only Pirsig's spirituality, not only into the nature of quality through the years from 1962 to 1993, 30 years of thinking about quality, but also something that can introduce us to the true brilliance and genius of Robert Pirsig. So out of all the 3 books, probably the one that's easiest to give us a sense of what it means to live a quality existence. So I hope that makes sense, and I will see you next time.